Women in the armed forces often see the most dangerous elements of combat, but as we've discussed here at HuffPost Live recently, they're unable to convert their military service into career advancement due to arcane combat exclusion rules that many female vets claim is against the Fifth Amendment. But last week, the Army gave the okay to women serving in special ops forces. So how much of a breakthrough is this really? Joining us to discuss right now, we've got Molly O'Toole, HuffPost news editor in New York City. Hey, Molly.
Hi, Molly.
Hi, how are you?
Good to see you. So, Molly, when we talked about this before, we were talking about the idea of a combat exclusion rule, and there were many female veterans that were suing to have this rule overturned. How is this related? What we're seeing here, women being able to serve, for instance, as pilots in special ops. How is this related to the lawsuit over the combat exclusion rule?
Well, first, we haven't gotten a whole lot of details about the special ops positions that are being opened to women. But I think it's more broadly, it's part of this ongoing discussion about the roles that women are playing in the military currently, and maybe the recognition they should be getting for those roles. It's my understanding that this is kind of part of that review that's been going on across the services, and that was mandated by Secretary Panetta. For the services to review what positions could be open to women and to initiate some of these pilot programs in which women are allowed to apply. They go through the training, and from there, they're supposed to kind of learn from that experience and see what positions can be opened officially or broadened further. So it's my understanding that this is one of those pilot programs, but some of these programs have been initiated across the services, so not just in the Army. But what's unique about this one in particular is positions for which women themselves, women veterans, have expected that are going to be kind of the last barrier to fall are these special ops positions, some of the most rigorous, most classified positions that the military has to offer professionally.
You want to remind us a little bit about, Molly, about the combat exclusion rule and the cases that were brought forward in the hopes that this law would be overturned, this rule would be overturned?
Sure. Well, this has been, a decades-long battle at this point now. Women have served in the military in some capacity as long as the military has existed. But the policy today was largely formed by the '94 combat exclusion rules, which, in a broad sense, we can get into the kind of the nitty-gritty of the language there, but excluded women from combat positions on the ground. Now, this has, especially with the Gulf War, that really started to force the hand of the military to consider what roles women could play. Not only did they need women, do they need women to serve in these roles? A lot of women served in roles in the Gulf War that were considered to be combat roles, whether in reality, if not by official policy. So of late, Panetta and many of the leaders across the services have been part of this discussion, opening up positions to women. Just last year, the thousands of positions were opened officially that are closer to combat. We're talking about things like tank mechanic. A lot of aviation positions are some of the places that women can get closest kind of to the front lines. Then again, you have to kind of have a discussion about warfare today, and there isn't a kind of a traditional front line, so really any position that you're in can be a combat position, but loosely that's the policy. It still exists. Women are largely barred from combat positions.
And one of the things we have to note here too is that what they're saying is that there would not be any kind of special consideration, that there will be a gender agnostic process when it comes to the selection for the pilots here specifically. So, how big of a deal is that too? Because I feel that, people often might have certain, not necessarily misconceptions, it depends on the position and what they'll be doing, but they think that this means they'll be softening some of the standards to let women in, not the case with the pilots.
Right. Well, that was one of the arguments that both critics, but also the Department of Defense cited when talking about whether they could open positions further. And they said that, this needs to be a slow process. We need to study what the impact of opening these positions to women will be. And one of the things that they noted was, we need to have gender neutral standards. If we open up these positions to women, can women do them? And I think that argument, there's understanding of the challenges of fielding a military such as ours. But a lot of women have met, physical tests in the same way that men have. And a lot of women just ask for that chance. They don't want any special treatment. they want to meet the same standards as men would. But the argument goes, if they can meet those standards, then why not let them do that job? And there have been some pilot programs that have tried to kind of neutralize standards for women. The Associated Press actually came out with a story about a week ago about that program in the Marine Corps. Thus far, only 2 women have tried to go through their very rigorous infantry officer training, and none have succeeded thus far.
Well, an airline passenger scribbles a note on a napkin and leaves it on his seat for the plane's co-pilot, telling her the cockpit is, quote, no place for a woman. It was written by a man named David. He sat in row 12E. Well, the pilot firing back with a response. But first, women not so well represented in aviation, in the military or commercial pilots. Here are the facts. Just 6.5% of pilots in commercial airlines are actually female. That number even less than our Air Force, coming in at only 5%. Well, our own Leah Gabriel is a former naval pilot, and she joins us now. Perfect person to have on this story. So what did you think when you saw that this had happened to a female commercial pilot?
Well, sadly, Gretchen, it actually didn't surprise me that much. And what's funny about this is that David didn't sign his last name, as you mentioned. So, the pilot really only had one way to respond to this, and she went to Facebook. A local Winnipeg newspaper posted what she said, and she basically said that it was her pleasure flying him safely to his destination. And then, quote, I have heard many comments from people throughout my 17-year career as a pilot, most of them positive. Your note is without a doubt the funniest. It was a joke, right? Right? I think not. Well, in his note, David also told the pilot that the greatest honor should be being a mother, not being a captain. And I think you'll appreciate her response, as do I. She signed her note basically saying, and now back to my most important role, being a mother.
As if you can't try and do both at the same time. I mean, you would know so much about this because you were one of those 5% who actually flew fighter aircraft for the military. What was it like being a woman in that position?
Well, you run into a lot of funny stories like this. I mean, I look back over my career, and there were a lot of times when I can remember people coming up to me and saying funny things like this. One time I was on a cross-country flight. I was in my F-18. I stopped somewhere for gas, and this guy walks up to me as I'm getting in the jet, and he says to me, "You've done this before, right?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, let me think. Pull back, Earth gets smaller. Push forward, Earth gets bigger, right? So how hard could it be?" So, I mean, there are those perceptions, and I think everyone's kind of guilty of sometimes, stereotyping people.
Well, I do think you hit the nail on the head, though, that he didn't bother to leave his last name because, God forbid, she would have posted something on Facebook and be able to find him, right? So he remains anonymous as David in 12E. The other irony is that when he wrote this note, it was International Women of Aviation Week, just by happenstance.
Well, Gretchen, I think the funniest thing about this is this poor guy is sitting there in his seat, terrified, just making this silent protest, and his life is in the hands of this woman. So I think it's pretty funny, and I think he's probably been punished enough by how scared he must have been. But, of course, as she said, she flew him safely to his destination, and it was her pleasure.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Leah, and be sure to watch Leah live on Shepard Smith Reporting. That's every day starting at 3 p.m. Eastern right here on the Fox News Channel. Thanks.
Now, should women be allowed to serve in combat units? Last Friday, the Military Leadership Diversity Commission, a panel of retired and current military officers, said yes. They recommended the policy which prohibits females from being assigned to combat units to be eliminated to, quote, create a level playing field for all qualified service members. Now, one of the key points of the report said that keeping women out of combat posts is a barrier to promotion, since promotion to many senior positions is dependent on that experience. But women make up approximately 14% of the armed services. More than 255,000 have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And if approved by the Defense Department, this could be the second large change in policy, following the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell just a few weeks ago. But there are, of course, opponents of this plan, many questioning whether women have the necessary strength and stamina needed for combat. But with the way that today's wars are fought, don't many women already find themselves in the line of fire? Here to discuss it with me is Genevieve Chase, founder and executive director of American Women Veterans, and Jim Hansen, retired Special Operations Master Sergeant and military blogger at black5.net. I want to thank you both for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Jim, I'm going to start with you because I know that you are opposed to women being in combat units. Please tell us why.
I'll go ahead and stipulate to the strength and the stamina, and that there are some women who have those characteristics, could pull their weight, and want to do it. But let's agree that's probably a pretty small number. We're not talking about a ton of people who actually even want to do that. My problem is in the internal dynamic of the unit when you take the pointiest end of the spear, and this report actually recommended putting women on special forces teams and with Navy SEAL units. All right, if you put a gay guy, since we just went through DADT, right, if you put a gay guy on a special forces team, it's going to be about 5 minutes. Yeah, that's great. Next slide. There's no opportunity for interaction. There's no issues there beyond who cares. If you put a woman, if we put Genevieve on a team with me and 11 of my friends, we're instantly going to start backstabbing each other to gain favor with her.
But now you're assuming that every other guy there is also
like
going to be straight, and that some of them might not start jumping all over the gay service.
All right, well, having been on a team, I can stipulate that that's pretty much what we did. And anytime we were around women, there was a formal competition. All right, the idea of introducing the dynamic into a situation where it is life and death, and now you've got people who instead of that are thinking about
the fact
what
that
I'm
they're
thinking
horny.
about.
I mean, Genevieve, tell me, you are a veteran here. Did you experience, did men treat you like that? Do you think that that's even fair, that just because they can't keep it in their pants, you shouldn't be allowed to serve in a combat unit?
There are so many places I could start here. I think, first of all, it's really important to sort of isolate the debate into its various different levels. At the forefront of this debate is whether or not women should serve in combat, not necessarily combat arms or combat units. But that, of course, is where the debate has been going. That's what everybody wants to talk about. So, are women in combat? Yes. Are we serving honorably? Are we dying in combat? Absolutely. Are we being attached or assigned to units? They're getting around this with using sort of semantics, the words attached and assigned. Absolutely. So we're getting attached to these units versus assigned. And we're missing out on critical training. Critical weapons training, movement, maneuvering, some of the things that these units go through that we get attached to, we don't receive the same type of training. We're not even allowed to go to some of the training. So, I think the most important thing that we need to discuss at this point is whether a panel or whether pundits or whether people back here talking about the issue should talk about what should happen downrange. Commanders downrange should decide who goes out with them, and everybody should be trained. And we get into the physical debate, we get into the men versus women. In a modern society like ours, we all go to school equally. We all serve and learn and interact in civil society equally. So then we get into this military environment, we take the men and we herd them off into this special training area, and then we start programming them to think differently about women and to perceive women differently. And I agree that it does heighten some of the interaction that goes on. But if the debate is boys want a club of their own, then let's talk about that. But we're talking about whether or not women should be